So it's with, I guess, great trepidation that, again, we're going to be fighting with the federal government, who has all the resources at its disposal.
Tonight, is banning oil tankers off the coast of British Columbia good for the resources but bad for the people?
TV, if there is civil disobedience and people decide to violate the injunction, I certainly hope that we don't end up watching a line of journalists standing along some invisible line.
Lines in the sand. Dedication to solid reporting leads to recognition for one of our own.
My attacker, I'd like to see him own his mistake.
And a walk to the corner store takes a violent turn. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Cheryl McKenzie. A bill to ban all oil tanker traffic from the northern BC coast is being debated in the House of Commons. Bill C-48, or the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, was introduced by the Liberals a year ago. It aims to protect the coasts and improve marine safety. But according to Mayor John Helene of the Lac Quellam First Nation, the proposed tanker ban would impose hardships on his community. Helene says the bill has been pushed through without any consultation, and it would create obstacles for economic opportunities.
In my community, we have a fish plant, the only one on the north coast of BC. And at its peak, we employ over 100 people. And with DFO and government agencies imposing regulations on us that we can't make a living fishing salmon anymore, and allowing us to diversify into other economic opportunities is what we look for. So it's with, I guess, great trepidation that, again, we're going to be fighting with the federal government, who has all the resources at its disposal, and we have to fight for every little bit of resource to improve the lot of our people.
One of APTN's reporters was honored with the 2018 Press Freedom Award in Ottawa on Thursday. Award recipient Justin Brake faces jail time for his coverage of Muskrat Falls after land protectors breached an injunction. 2 years ago, Brake followed the group through the gates while working for The Independent. He says the freedom of the press is essential to tell stories in the public interest.
And with a Kinder Morgan with chiefs just in the last 48 hours vowing the largest civil disobedience in Canadian history if the Trudeau government pursues the Kinder Morgan pipeline, I hope that we can all sit in our offices, newsrooms, and homes and watch on TV. If there is civil disobedience and people decide to violate the injunction, I certainly hope that we don't end up watching a line of journalists standing along some invisible line, filming the story, moving away from them.
Until now, the Alberta government has been responsible for the administration of trapping and trapping licenses in that province. But in Treaty 8 territory, the province is relinquishing that responsibility to the Alberta Treaty 8 Trappers Association. The province signed a memorandum of understanding with the association and will provide a one-time payment of $275,000 to help with administration and training. The Treaty 8 Trappers Association will now be responsible for managing all traps within their territory.
The people who formed the group are largely First Nations trappers who have been on the land their whole lives, and they wanted an opportunity to be able to pass on the trapping traditions to their youth in their community and to ensure that the lifestyle of trapping continues into the future, and that's what we've done. It's a great future for trapping.
The Hot Docs Film Festival showcases documentaries from over the world. This year, a dozen Indigenous filmmakers are being screened. APTN's Beverly Andrews caught up with the production team of a brand new film and brings us this story.
It's the 25th anniversary for Hot Docs. This year, the festival has the world premiere of Turning Tables.
I get nervous when I get out there because everyone's like, eyes on me, you know.
Blending the old with the new, Turning Tables follows Thunder Bay-born DJ Joshua DePerry, also known as Classic Roots. He's an Anishinaabe fancy dancer who incorporates contemporary dance moves at traditional powwows.
I like to, experiment new sounds, new wave, and knowing there's any ways to get people to take interest and just have fun on the dance floor.
He blends powwows and techno music, collaborating with a variety of artists. Through his music, he celebrates the continued resilience of Indigenous people.
You can put traditional sounds into techno music where it can be very fun and exciting, and knowing that you can create something out of a blue and having fun with it, and people can relate to it.
Turning Tables took months to produce, but took a lifetime of work and love from De Perry, who also works with youth through a mentoring program that promotes art and collaborations.
What's great about Powwow Techno and what Josh is doing is that he's bringing this European-centric techno music into, on the res and into these communities where it's check out this new music from another part of the world and look at how we can put this together and blend it in a way that works for us and inspires you too.
But it's not the only Indigenous film being screened this year. Films by Canadian and international Indigenous filmmakers and producers cover a variety of topics, like abnormal freedom.
Some of these pictures I don't really remember.
By Cree Ojibwe filmmaker Kayari McNabb, touching on her fragmented childhood, a result of being separated from her family at birth. It's just one of the dozen Indigenous documentaries showcased along with Turning Tables. Turning Tables and Classic Roots will be touring Ontario First Nations to bring music to the youth over the summer. Beverly Andrews, APTN National News, Toronto.
A former premier of Nunavut published a book and launched it this week at Montreal's Avatek Cultural Institute. Danielle Rochette has more.
Paul Okalik was more than proud to present his book titled Let's Move On. Paul Okalik speaks out. Accompanied by his family, he explained why he wanted to write this memoir.
Provide my support to our government and give more direction on how we can improve government and provide better government for the citizens of Nunavut. So I hope that will provide some assistance for future governments in Nunavut.
Raised in Pangnirtung on Baffin Island, Okalik was elected the first premier of Nunavut, the new Canadian territory, in 1999. Education, housing, Inuit culture and economic growth were the priorities of the newly formed Nunavut government. As premier for almost a decade, he worked hard for Inuit people's long-standing goal of self-government. And it was with humor that he described his role as a politician in front of the audience.
I've been blessed in life and being allowed to work in fields that I enjoyed. I didn't plan out to be a politician. It just worked out that way, and I wish I never did, so that's my only regret. I worked very hard to become a lawyer, and to blow that away for 15 years is something I shouldn't have done, because I would be happily retired by now.
Louis McComber, anthropologist and Nunavut resident for 12 years, contributed to Okalik's book by describing some historical context.
I'm sure it's going to be a great reference, mostly for Inuit students in northern Canada, because there's different territories where there is Inuit population.
Let's Move On, documenting the creation of Nunavut, is the 5th book on the Arctic, published by Baraka Books. Danielle Rochette, APTN National News, Montreal.
And we'd like to make a correction to a piece that aired earlier this week on our newscast. The Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations held a youth symposium, and we reported that most of the youth had been in the Child Family Services system. In fact, only some of the youth attending had been in the system. Importantly, the 2 youth interviewed in the piece had never been in the child welfare system. We regret the error. There's lots more ahead tonight on APTN National News. Here now is our first look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Cloudy and 15 in Fredericton, overcast and 4 in St. John's. -8 and cloudy in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 3 and sunny in Kuujjuaq. A wet day for much of southern Quebec, 9 in Gaspé, 7 in Val-d'Or. Overcast and 20 in Sarnia, a sunny 16 in Sault Ste. Marie. Rain and 10 in Sudbury, sunny and 18 in Thunder Bay. Overcast skies in northern Manitoba, 12 in Flin Flon, 12 in Norway House. Overcast and 20 in Dauphin, 20 under the sun in Winnipeg. Mostly sunny in southern Saskatchewan, 20 in Regina, 17 in Saskatoon. Partly cloudy and 11 in La Ronge, sunny and -7 in Stony Rapids. Thanks for staying with us. 4 people in Vancouver's downtown east side are recovering after being attacked by a man on a knife-slashing spree. APTN's Lori Hamlin has the details.
Gary Olver has been living in Vancouver's downtown east side for the last 6 years. Early Friday night, while walking to his local corner store with his wife, Olver was attacked from behind with what he thinks was a box cutter knife.
He slashed my throat, and I didn't know at that point what he had done, and I stepped back and I said, "Hey, what's your problem?" And at that point he laughed and he lunged at me again.
The attacker then ran off, and Olver and his wife went to Union Gospel Mission nearby. There they called 911. Police were on scene within less than a minute. An ambulance arrived 3 minutes later.
They didn't take us seriously at first, and while I was sitting in the ambulance, that's when the other calls started coming through.
Those other calls were to report more knife attacks. 3 separate attacks within 10-minute intervals by the same young man. 5 minutes after the last attack, police had Joshua David Menier in custody. Police say no one sustained life-threatening injuries, but the victims and the community are scared. And that worries Gary because the downtown east side already has a bad rap. The area is notorious for drug use, crime, homelessness, and mental illness.
It's just one of those things. It's one of these odd things. We're not sure why we're dealt these things sometimes, but I really want to, convey the message that, this was kind of an isolated incident and that people shouldn't be scared in it, especially in this neighborhood. It's a beautiful neighborhood and it's full of friendly people.
Despite the slashes on his neck, Olver says he's doing fine, and he hopes his attacker, who is facing 4 charges of aggravated assault, gets help and issues an apology.
I'm good, my heart goes out to those other victims, and I hope they will move past the trauma that they have endured. My attacker, I'd like to see him own his mistake, and I'd like to see him get help for himself and do something constructively with his life. Like, you have to remember, this guy's only 23 years old. He's just a very, very young person.
Lori Hamlin, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Shocking situation. We'd like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Over the past few months, Bill C-45, or the Cannabis Act, has been under the scope of the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples. After hearing from 23 First Nation, Métis, and Inuit witnesses, the committee has recommended the bill be delayed. Senator Patterson joins us now from Ottawa. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Patterson. Now, the committee is recommending that Bill C-45 is delayed as much as a year. Why is that?
It was very clear to us that there was not adequate consultation on this bill with Aboriginal peoples. There was consultation. Most of it took place after the bill was drafted. That's not the way to do consultation. You ideally start with consultation and then build those results into the bill. We also heard from many Aboriginal leaders that communities aren't ready. There aren't mental health and community wellness and addictions services available for what was predicted certainly to be some negative impacts amongst a population that's considered vulnerable. So we need to take the time, as the Prime Minister said at the AFN meeting yesterday when he was talking about the Indigenous rights framework, we need not to do this quickly, we need to do it right, was what he said. And that's what the committee recommended. Slow it down, take the time, deal with the issues, and another one, of course, was the economic opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely, and that fits well into that Indigenous rights framework. Now, we know that another one of the recommendations is to allow Indigenous communities to negotiate a tax collection on the revenue generated by cannabis. How would this help communities?
Well, Manny Jules, who is the long-standing and I think respected Chief Commissioner of the Tax Commission, which, as you know, was set up by the federal government and has quite a few Aboriginal communities participating, he said, look, we are governments like the provinces and the territories. We're going to have to deal with the health impacts, with educational issues, with issues like recreation facilities for youth, which many communities have said are needed to give young people alternatives to marijuana. We need to have a share of the revenues that are going to be generated from this new industry. And we also know that many Aboriginal communities have been approached to grow and produce marijuana on reserve. If without their ability to participate in the excise tax revenues, those revenues will be lost to them and possibly lost to Canada, as is happening with the tobacco industry. So there were some very clear calls for respect and negotiation with Aboriginal communities. And really, this is all about recognizing that Aboriginal people have rights under Section 35 of the Constitution. They have inherent rights, and they were just overlooked in the rush to implement this legislation and in the rush to do very imperfect consultations.
Now, you know, this committee, with the Senate committee, of course, you have to make decisions based on information. So if all of these things are needed for First Nations in order to take part in the economy of the cannabis and all the safety things with having mental health centers, mental health programs, does the Senate committee know how much of an increase is needed?
Well, we know, like, I'll just tell you about my territory of Nunavut, which has the very high proportion of Inuit in its population. You know, along with the other two territories, there are no treatment facilities, zero, zip, in any of the three northern territories. We know that we have fragile social fabrics in our communities. We have issues of residential school, intergenerational trauma, relocation, 60s scoop, and suicide, in common with other Aboriginal communities, sadly, in other parts of Canada. We don't have any place to help people who are going to have mental health and addiction problems, predictably, experts have told us this, as a result of easy access and cheaper price for marijuana. So we have to be engaged in ensuring that the revenues are dedicated to providing these facilities and having them in place before legalization takes place.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Why we're calling
and
for more
like you're
time.
saying, right?
So
like you're saying, that's
ready.
Just one jurisdiction. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your views with us on this, Senator Patterson.
Thank you.
Stay with us after the break. A preview of tonight's edition of APTN Investigates. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast. 10 and some cloud in Fort Chippewa in Alberta, 17 and clear in Grand Prairie. Cloudy in southern Alberta, 17 in Edmonton, 23 in Medicine Hat. Cloudy in southern BC, 21 in Penticton, 14 in Bella Coola. 11 and cloudy in Prince Rupert, a sunny 18 in Fort St. John. Mostly cloudy in the Yukon, 8 in Whitehorse, 8 in Old Crow. Sunny and 5 degrees in Yellowknife, cloudy and 13 in Fort Liard. In the western Arctic, a few clouds and 5 in Delaney, cloudy and -3 in Chukchuyak. Sunny and -12 in Whale Cove, Nunavut, -14 in Repulse Bay. In the high Arctic tomorrow, partly cloudy and -5 in Cape Dorset, sunny and -14 in Igulik. Families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls have been calling for an inquiry into crimes against their loved ones for decades. When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau honored his election promises, many families were filled with hope. Tonight on APTN Investigates, producer Holly Moore brings you After the Stories Are Told. Here's a preview.
It took decades to get to this moment.
Among Carolyn's top priorities will be the creation of a national public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada.
Divisions are deep between those who support this inquiry and those who do not.
I'm ashamed that this has gone the way it has. It could have been an amazing experience for families if it was done right and if they had taken their time and not rushed through it to get it done.
And some grassroots communities have given up altogether.
We acknowledge that this is the inquiry we have. We need to be prepared for the fallout and aftercare. So now let's do what we can to reduce as much harm as we can.
You can see that full episode on Friday night after APTN National News. That's all we have for you tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Join us again tomorrow for a special edition. We'll take you along with us on the route of the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline and hear directly from the people affected. Host Dennis Ward will be back on Monday. Enjoy the rest of your evening.